This is the unit on global change that will focus on working with complexity, uncertainty, and different perceptions of problems and solutions. So in that sense, I think this cartoon exemplifies already what the paradoxes of doing this work are. So you have a teacher saying, children, today we're going to learn code. It's important for a prosperous future. So the focus here on STEM and technology. And one of the students saying, teacher, after that, could we learn how to survive in a civilization threatened by ecosystem collapse, rising sea levels, and the resulting geopolitical turmoil, armed conflict, and the increasing polarization of ideological orientations, and humanity's seemingly insatiable appetite for stuff. So when we talk about global change, generally we get questions about how to present the information that is generally troubling without losing hope, right? So I think today we're going to problematize the notion of hope a little bit to see what we can do to be able to face the challenges that are presented to us without being attached to the continuity of the securities that we have today. I think the message of this presentation is that we do need to build the stamina to be able to work with the complexity of the issues, with the uncertainty of these challenges, of these global challenges, and with different perceptions of problems and solutions. And part of the presentation will look at how the education that we have received today doesn't equip us very well to engage with complexity, uncertainty, inequality, or pluralities of perspectives. So I'll start with the social cartography that you have in the unit as a suggestion for engagement with further exercises. And today there's a cartography of global justice education, presenting 6 analyses that present both a critique and a proposition. So I called it ethical political projects. And it's important actually to make a distinction between the analysis of something, like the critique of something, and the proposition, because sometimes the proposition doesn't follow the critique very well. Sometimes it becomes a circular thing. And sometimes you agree with the critique and you don't agree with the proposition, right? And sometimes you agree with the proposition and you don't agree with the critique. So it's very important as you're reading texts and engaging with resources to keep in mind that there is a critique implied, or a response to something that went before implied, and also a proposition. And making that distinction helps. So this table tries to break down what's the critique and what are the assumptions and what's the proposition for 6 different projects related to global justice education. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is kind of synthesize the arguments of orientation 3, 4, but especially 6, which are the orientations I work mostly with, I think, in my research in education. And these are orientations that are generally not very well articulated, or they're not amplified in our lives, in the media or in textbooks or in what we hear about education. So I'm going to present one analysis and one proposition in this very video. And you don't have to, it's not about agreeing or disagreeing again with it, but to put it out there, one possibility for us to think about global education, global citizenship education, and global justice education differently. So that's the idea of thinking about it otherwise. So going back to the distinctions that we have made both in the education unit and in the development unit between the yellow corn cob and the multicolored corn cob in the single story of progress, development, and human evolution. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at one way of tracing what sustains the conditions for this narrative, the single story, to be so enduring. So one of the things that we're going to do is to put the story within the metaphor of a house. So there's a house that sustains the single story of progress, development, and human evolution. And the stability of this house is dependent on historical, political, economic, and socio-ecological factors, because this house is situated in a planet and it is exceeding the limits of this planet. But it provides us a lot of security. So it provides us the security of what we know, what's comfortable, what is pleasurable, and it provides us a lot of enjoyment too. And one thing that is important to remember is that this house, specifically, if we're thinking about modernity as a house or modern institutions, specifically, has been built upon resource extraction, human exploitation, unfair trade, unjust debt, militarization, securitization, cognitive cultural imperialism, and the construction of these different dystopias. And here I use the idea of a Huxley dystopia in Brave New World for those inside the house, and the dystopia of Orwell in 1984 for those outside of the house who can't get access to the house. So we have this different kind of dystopia. One dystopia is where control is exercised through pleasure and enjoyment, which is Huxley dystopia, and Orwell's dystopia is the dystopia exercised through force, violence, and coercion. So if we don't have the idea that there are different contexts inside and outside of the house, but that the dystopia outside of the house actually sustains and subsidizes the comforts of the house, then we can have the idea that the house is only benevolent, and if we just expand the house, the planet's going to be a better place. Without this distinction between who pays the costs of the house and the idea that these costs are externalized, it's very difficult to have an analysis that will take us to a different place. So in a lot of the analysis in the media, it's precisely this connection between the comforts of the house and the benefits of the house and who pays for this that is often misrepresented or is missing. So we then say that the violences of the house are invisibilized violences because they're not made constantly visible to people. And then what we get in the single story of progress, development, and human evolution is that the story says that those who are leading development, who are leading modernity, who are leading global citizenship, are leading it as a result of their merit, of better education, maybe a higher intelligence, some kind of superiority that can only be sustained if we forget who's paying the price for the house. It's very difficult to bring this up sometimes because the story that the house is the best thing that has ever happened is extremely strong, and those invested in the house find it difficult to hear another story, to hear about those externalized costs. So let's just remember that the house is built upon other people's backs, let's put it like that. And also that the house itself right now, the size it has, is also unsustainable. So there's overconsumption. There's also a surplus labor force as a result of automation. And this is another difficult thing to bring up with people, right? So what is going to happen to people if there are not enough jobs? Then there's the ecological disaster as a result of climate change. There's violent conflict, mass migration. If your environment, even if you're not outside of the house, is affected by the sewage of the house or by you're being robbed of the resources that are necessary for the house, of course you will want some stability, and therefore there are lots of people wanting access to the house as well if life in their context has become very precarious. And then you have also within the house a context of hyper-individualism, of growing hyper-individualism, of what Sherry Turkle calls a disconnect, a connected disconnect with social media and technology, creating a different way that people relate to their identities and their relationships. You have growing wealth disparities. Many commentators are talking about a compromised democracy and a discourse of austerity that sustains the wealth disparity and creates even more inequalities. So in this context, what the analysis I'm presenting here suggests is that the house is cracking, especially because the roof, which is represented by shareholder capitalism, which is different from industrial capitalism, is structurally damaged. It's a leaking roof, so the water in the house is rising, and there's mold that is creating a context where the house is shaking. And this is creating a context of confusion, fear, a sense of scarcity, a lot of disaffection, especially school disaffection, boredom, a sense of impotence, anxiety, depression, and self-harm are also growing trends. There's also reactive and simplistic solutions popping up everywhere, people selling the solutions. There's a lot of fragility, resentment, scapegoating, anger, and hate when the house is cracking. So then the question would be, do we fix the house? Do we expand the house? Do we shrink the house? Do we build another house? Or do we learn to build other forms of shelter? There's an M missing in the slide. And this is where it's impossible to not look at education, right? So in the role of education in all of this. So number one, in the sense, is our inability to face the magnitude of the problem. And the education we have received has made us fragile to face what we have to face, mostly because it encourages and feeds a form of hope in the continuity of the house, both in terms of how it relates to knowledge, to being, to the economy, and to the nation state. And we can't imagine beyond life in a capitalist economy, relationships within a nation state, organization outside of the nation state. We can't imagine beyond this idea that being is defined by knowing, which is the Cartesian way of thinking. And we often can't imagine ourselves as embedded and interwoven with nature. We imagine ourselves as separate from it. And these are things that education has socialized us into, formal education, right? So how do we interrupt these patterns so that we can imagine, even fathom what life would look like without this house, or when the house collapses, or if the house collapses? What I'm also suggesting here is that what we're facing today is not a problem of doing or of thinking differently, but a problem that is related to being differently. So shifting doing and shifting thinking is one thing. Shifting being is another thing. It's an embodied thing. So if we're thinking about ourselves as neurobiological beings, it requires us to have very different neurobiological configurations that will generate different relationships that we have with the world. So it's not just about changing convictions. It's much more difficult than that. What I'm suggesting also is that our horizon of hope needs to be set beyond the continuity or transformation of the house, but in the possibility of activating this potentially wiser way of coexisting with each other as part of a wider metabolism that is represented by the planet. This is not just about content or knowledge. It's about practices of being with each other, with the planet, with nature, as we change the sense that nature is over there, we're over here, but that we're part of it. We're animals. We're one of the species that is part of this bigger metabolism. So the educational challenges that we face are many, but one of them is represented in this cartography that offers two different ways of thinking about education. There's education 1, think as I do and do as I say. And education 2, think for yourself and choose responsibly what to do. And then there are two ways of understanding and relating with knowledge. There's one way that says there's only one right answer, which is generally associated with a single story and with the yellow corn cob. And there is another way that says the possibilities are context dependent. They are context dependent in multiple ways, but that is more related to the multicolored corn cobs. And here we have A, B, C, and D. Education A, think as I do as I say, there's only one right answer, my way or the highway. So for us as teachers, this would be about figuring out what we want to do with the house or what we think everybody should do with the house and taking people to that change of conviction and getting people to have consensus over that, which has been the usual approach of the house itself in terms of the single story of progress, development, and human evolution. Then there's education B, which acknowledges that there are many different perspectives. There are people who would want the house, there are people who want something else. But in education 1, you would present that there's this other perspective, and you would present this other perspective as the new way forward. The example here that I have is when I was in a Catholic school as I was growing up for a period of time, I went to this Catholic school where the nuns would say, there are many different religions, but in this school, the best religion is Catholicism, and that's what you're going to learn. They wouldn't delegitimize the others, but they would say, in this space, that's what you're going to learn. Then you have education C, think for yourself, which is responsibly what you do as long as you arrive at my answer. And this is interesting because that's probably the foundation of humanism, where we say that if people think critically, they will arrive at the universal answer. Western humanism is based on universalisms, and I've seen so many times teachers starting philosophical inquiries where they do not say it, but they do hope that all students arrive at the same perspective. And then there's education D, which probably hasn't been part of the education of most of us who have been schooled in the Western system. And education D can also be understood in many different ways. There's one way of understanding education D where you say that every answer is a good answer, and it's just about getting the students' perspectives on things and validating them, which is not what I'm advocating here, because I think that's dangerous. I think what I'm posing in relation to D as an important part of an educational process is the education that helps us look at the complexities of contexts, the multiplicity of perspectives, and help students engage with that. So we don't give the answer, but we do provide and offer mechanisms for people to check their responsibilities, their accountabilities, the implications of their choices, the origins of their assumptions. So where is our perspectives coming from, where they're leading to, how can they be thought very differently. Then also that they can engage with questions of power, in questions like who decides, in whose name, for whose benefit. So all this is part, I think, of education D. But the problem is that if we haven't been exposed to that in our own education, it's very difficult also to normalize this or to embody this as a teacher, especially because some of our desires as teachers are still related to education A. Because if we've been told there is one answer and that we should all kind of look for that, there's a desire for the perfect lesson plan that is going to work in every context. There's a desire that we can actually arrive at something and have the security of that arrival and kind of rest in that, the certainty that we have this answer. So I think I have that too. I have the idea, it comes back sometimes, I think it's ingrained in us that we might arrive somewhere where we can then rest. And I think I have that also in relation to cleaning my house, like that one day I'll just clean everything and I'll have to clean again. But of course, this is a fantasy, right? That we will have to keep thinking about this until we die, and more deeply now than ever. So part of my efforts in teacher education, for example, have been about how to support teachers to think on their feet and feel comfortable with the discomfort that creates, and where they can feel secure with not having the answers to give the students and walking with them, but not necessarily letting them just lead the way. I'm not talking about that. I think as teachers, we have a responsibility to be with and to be asking the questions that will deepen the analysis, that will push them to work on themselves, on their own desires, and interrupt indifference and push them towards responsibility, accountability, not only to society right now, but to 7 generations from now. So how is it that we can activate in them this sense of responsibility or of joy in responsibility, in being responsible for the bigger metabolism, for everything that's happening at the same time that we become responsible for 7 generations. So back to the idea that I presented in the introduction, we are socialized to want authoritative technical knowledge, models, methods, and solutions to explain everything, to fix everything, to mediate our relationships, and to give us hope and a sense of purpose and self-worth. And this is because of the schooling we received inside the house. But we need to learn to sit with the difficulties and discomforts of working together through the complexities, paradoxes, different worldviews, the illusions, the delusions, the addictions, the projections, the traumas, the uncertainty, vulnerability, and precarity of this specific moment where the house is shaking, and in radical interdependence, seeing ourselves as interwoven and extremely interconnected with each other, and taking responsibility for the 7 generations. So the first approach, if we want more authoritative technical knowledge, would require more description and prescription. So in universities you have this fantasy that the next article, if we just describe the problem better, we will arrive at the solution. And this is one approach. And the next approach is that we need different kinds of intellectual and affective labor that involve our affective investments in the undoing of those. It involves the body, it involves our relationships and how we are rather than just what we think and what we do. And in that sense, what I'm going to leave you with is the Earthcare Global Justice Framework. This is a project that I'm working with a network of educational initiatives that offer alternative ways of approaching teaching and learning. And in this framework, we use the metaphor of mushrooms. So we use the house as a metaphor for analysis, and the metaphor of mushrooms as a metaphor for how to think about change in the future and what's needed in the future. And mushrooms are dependent on something that is called mycelium that stays inside the earth. And the mycelium is the biomass that generates the possibilities for the mushrooms to spring up. So we say that ecological and economic justice are like the mushrooms. They spring up when the mycelium is healthy. And the mycelium is related in this metaphor to cognitive justice, affective justice, and relational justice. So cognitive justice is our relationship with knowledge and our capacity to deal with complexity. And here we use the metaphor of encountering different ways of knowing and being, because each way of knowing is also an ignorance of another way. So working productively with our ignorance. Ignorance is not something that we need to be ashamed of if we take this approach of humility, that we don't know. So this cognitive justice approach recalibrates our relationship to knowledge, to what we know, what we don't know, what is knowable, what's unknowable, to create a relationship of more humility and more generosity in our encounters with our own ignorance and with different ways of knowing, in order to find a kind of wisdom that can sustain life in the planet, aiming towards ecological and economic justice. Then there's affective justice, which is related to our traumas, our addictions, our desires, our dreams, and understanding that the house and the current context has limited the ways we can imagine ourselves in relation to the metabolism we're part of. So affective justice is about moving and helping us move both collectively and individually all these emotions that have been clogged up, so that we can together be able to sit with the pain and the joys of coexisting, but in a very different way than the way that we are exposed to through the house. And then there's relational justice, which is about establishing connections with each other that do not require us to know or to understand, that we understand that we are already related and connected to everything, and that whatever we do affects these interrelations. So relational justice would be about attention and redistribution of even resources in ways that can nurture better connections and better ways of seeing interdependence and interwovenness. And we have several resources in each of them, with activities that are both intellectual and experiential, to invite people to engage with what the house has prevented them to engage with. So we're seeing the house here as something that actually constrains or restricts the availability of possibilities that we can face in the world, that we can use too, strategies that we can use. And here in Earthcare, we are indeed emphasizing indigenous ways of knowing, the parts of indigenous ways of knowing that can offer not a model for the future or an answer, but practices of relationships and practices of engagement that can help us get beyond the restrictions of identity or of knowing that the house has socialized us into. And so Earthcare, again, is about the kind of education that we promote, is an education that cultivates in students the ability to live at peace with uncertainty, ambivalence, plurality, in the absence of dependable authorities, that fortifies students' critical and self-critical faculties, that trains their capacity for changing frames, that prepares them for both the anxiety and the joys of the unexplored and unexpected, and that instigates courage so that students can take responsibility for their choices. And this is coming partially from Zygmunt Bauman, but also from other sources, including indigenous ways of knowing and being. And I'm going to finish this unit today with the questions that we ask in this work of Earthcare, but also the collective that I'm part of, which is called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And this is a video that I'm going to include in the same page where you will find the video of this unit. And I think they are an invitation for people to engage further with these questions, but I think they represent very different questions from the usual questions that we ask in education. And I think what they point out or gesture towards is the need for us to think about education in broader terms, not just in institutional terms, not just as schooling, and our responsibility as educators to 7 generations, to the next 7 generations, and what kinds of being do we want to nurture so that our possibilities for our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are viable. So life on this planet is going to be viable for them. So I'll leave you with the questions. I hope that you enjoyed the whole course in this unit. And there is an experiential learning course that happens in Slovenia every summer that is related to this framework that you're also invited to take part in. I'm going to send the information at the end of the course if you're interested in deepening your engagement with the framework and with the network. So thank you again, and I'll ask you to watch the next video.